Hi, welcome to God Stories today. My name's Chris Thompson. You guys coming? Good morning and welcome. It's morning here anyway. I don't know what time it is where you are. I'm in the most incredible location, and you might have already spotted that by the sound. It's a bit echoey, and that's because I'm in a palace. I'm not often in a palace as a South Londoner, growing up on the streets of South London, but today I am. And it's an amazingly historic one, and it's full of prayer. It's centuries old, and it's a place of prayer. It really is. It's Bath and Wells Diocese. I'm here with Bishop Peter Hancock. Thank you so much for your time. I really do appreciate it.
Lovely to have you, and lovely to welcome you to the palace.
Yeah, I literally had to come through a moat this morning. It was amazing. Not like literally through it, but over it. It was quite something.
We've got a drawbridge. We put it down for you. So we knew you were coming, and we're really pleased to see you.
There was hot oil over the top, just in case I was like, a little bit too South Londery. Yeah, so if you hear the echo, it's because of the beauty of this place, and hopefully our microphones are clear enough for you to hear the story that we're going to hear of Peter Hancock. As per usual, may I encourage you to check us out on social media, so Twitter, Facebook and Instagram. Just look for God Stories Today. And if you'd like to email me, if you're feeling a stirring in your heart to be interviewed on God Stories Today, please feel free to take a brave pill and call me, or should I say email me, on godstoriestoday@gmail.com. May I encourage you to do that. So again, welcome Bishop Peter. Thank you for your time. I know you're a busy man. We normally start off with a snapshot of where the interviewee is right now, and then we start at the beginning in terms of the God story. So you're a busy diocesan bishop of Bath and Wells. What is that? What is that like?
What does that mean? It means that I look after what we used to call the old county of Somerset. So we've got about 530 churches that we look after. And then, of course, there's hospitals. We've got about 180 church schools, which are very important to us. We've got colleges, universities. We used to have prisons. They've gone, but we still have links with all the youth custody centres and offenders. And we try to be out there as much as we can. Wherever there are people, we try to be there with them, making their days, their lives better, sharing God's love with them. That's what we're about.
And how long have you been a bishop here in Bath and Wells?
I've been a bishop here now for over 5 years, and I'm sure others listening will know 5 years fly by, so it's gone really, really fast.
Just before we go back to the beginning, as it were, it just popped into my mind, and I know you're a public figure, but if you could be, I don't know, as candid as possible, but I realise, you're a bishop. What's the best thing about being a bishop, and what's the worst thing about being a bishop?
The best thing is meeting people, and that is the treasure of life, God's people, all people, and we meet them, Bishop Ruth and I and others across the diocese, in all sorts of places. People invite us into their homes and their schools and their workplaces, and we hear some amazing and wonderful stories, and we hear some sad and difficult stories, and we meet folk at some of the tenderest and most painful parts of life, and that's a huge privilege to sit and to listen as people tell us something of their own story. So that's the best thing, I think, is meeting the people. The hardest thing is...
Wait for it!
It's very, very dull. It's just the emails, the administration, the governance. I think it's really important that any organisation is well led, well governed, well resourced, that people know what they're about, that those who are readers and clergy and ministers and church wardens, etc., and organists and choir masters are cared for and supported appropriately. And to do that, that's what the diocese is here to do. We're here to help churches, chaplaincies, people in their own lives live out their own story. And the motto, the vision, the mission for our diocese is living and telling the story of Jesus.
We're going to talk about that in a minute.
Good.
I've actually got that down here. I was talking to my wife as I was driving up through the amazing country of the southwest of England to be here today, and literally she was saying, you've got to ask him about the power of story and why that's the diocesan vision here. Obviously, God's stories today, power of stories. So it'd be nice to hear your thoughts on that in a moment. But time's ticking away. Where were you born?
I was born in Kent. I'm an original Chav. I was born in Chatham, which in those days was very rough. I mean, it's been regenerated a bit, but actually people who remember Chatham in my day remember it as being significantly deprived.
Oh, right.
And that's where my family had lived. That's where I was born.
And how long did you live there for?
We were just there for a few years. We then moved to Buckinghamshire, and then my first memories are on the Isle of Wight. We went to the Isle of Wight when I was 4, which was absolutely beautiful.
Yeah, it is. I've only been there twice, but it is stunning, isn't it?
Yeah, and back in the, would have been late 50s, it was quiet and peaceful. We didn't have traffic lights, we didn't have traffic wardens,
Really?
we didn't have dual carriageways. It was very, very pastoral, very peaceful and delightful. I used to walk to the beach. I used to walk to school, walking over a railway. I used to walk through a park. My brother and I would go to the beach, age 7 or 8, and spend the day there swimming and then walk home again. I mean, it was just lovely.
Did it shape your spirituality? I know I'm jumping in there, but looking back on it now, with nature all around you and the simplicity of what you've just described and the beauty of it all, did it shape your spirituality? I'm thinking of like the Celtic spirituality, being in touch with nature and so forth. Is that part of who you are now?
I think it's very important. For me, I get restless if I'm too far away from the sea too long. For me, the sea is just a thing of glory and wonder. And in Somerset, we've got the Mendips, we've got Exmoor, we've got the Quantocks, beautiful countryside. And countryside for me is very important. My degree was in a branch of geology. Originally, I was a natural scientist. And there's something about the natural world that for me, speaks of God, speaks of wonder, speaks of the most incredible beauty and intricacy.
I find that fascinating because I'm the same, if I may be so personal. I just think it's a real shame sometimes that there is sometimes what I would say a false dichotomy between science and faith, and that somehow they're seen as being against each other. When I think of science and the natural order, physics, chemistry and biology, they are God's creation. They are God's laws that he's put in place. And when I look at amazing documentaries on television, such as Brian Cox's sort of like The Planets or whatever it is, I'm looking at God's creation through that in awe. And I think it's a bit of a shame if a scientist doesn't sort of do the same, because you're missing out on the awe side in terms of the God bit.
Kepler, who gave us an understanding of planetary motion, that it was going to be elliptical rather than circular, said we are thinking God's thoughts after him.
Love it.
We're discovering what God has put in place. And Galileo spoke and said that God has spoken in 2 books. There's the book of his word and the book of his works. One is about creation and one is about the Creator's love for us. And God speaks powerfully. I'm sure people listening to our conversation today, lots of people are thinking of a beach or a mountain or a river, and they're thinking, I understand that. There's something about these places that speak to me about a wonderful creative God.
I can see you've come alive speaking about that, so thank you for sharing that. But keeping in your early life, what can you remember your first, if you like, thought or awareness of God? So for instance, and by that I don't necessarily mean like the start of a relationship with him, although it can be that. But it's something along the lines of, like, I remember when I was in primary school, there was a guy who came in, I can't even remember who he was probably the local vicar, but he told us about God's stories, basically. And that was my first awareness of the notion that there actually could be a God, a creator. Can you remember your first sort of memories of the possibility of a God, the concept of God?
I mean, it's easier looking back. I mean, at the time, one didn't always know what was going on. But for me, I had the privilege, although I didn't know what this meant at the time, to go to a church school, for my infant school and my junior school, and then subsequently from 11 to 18. So they were church foundations. And I think I was just introduced to the kindness and the love of God. I can remember Mrs. Jones, who's still alive in her 80s, on the Isle of Wight. Mrs. Jones, if you're watching, it's lovely to... and Mrs. Wheeler and Mr. Brown and Mr. Dickinson, and they were themselves Christians. They were people of faith. And although there was the God stories and all we did, there was also kindness, and they cared for us, and you sensed something of God's love through their care. So that was very important. I mean, the first memory I've got, if you like, in being involved was being Joseph in the nativity play with the tea towel. And
That's a top role.
I've still got the black and white picture, and I remember Elizabeth, who I adored, I must have been about 8, was Mary. So, and all the angels were gathered around us, and the shepherds and the wise men. And that photo, I can remember sitting there being Joseph in the school nativity play in the church, because we were a church school. We were regularly in and out of the church. And I think at that point, my parents didn't go to church. I didn't go to church till I was well into my teenage years.
Oh, okay.
But before that, God was at work, calling and drawing and opening my mind and heart.
Can you talk about that a little bit more, if you can? Because the concept of God working in your life before you even know God is working in your life is really something that's come through in a lot of the interviews that I've done. Are there any mile marker moments as a child that you can now look back on and say, that's got God written all over it?
I'm a normal boy. I was in the Boy Scouts. We had St George's Day parade, and I remember most of my mates didn't want to go. They thought being seen publicly in a cub uniform, marching through the streets, but going to church was something that they really didn't want to do. And I just knew that when I walked into that church, there was something there that I didn't understand, but I wanted to. I knew there was something in my life that was missing, and I knew there was something there. And I think that was the Spirit beginning to draw me.
Could you talk about how that felt, if you can remember?
I think my mates were sort of mucking about. You know, they saw this as something which we had to do, because if we didn't go to church parade, you couldn't then go.
But that longing, that feeling in your heart that there was something missing, that's I find intriguing. Even at a young age, you felt that.
Yes, and I think particularly when I became a Christian, I mean, I can remember the first time, jumping now to my teenage years, when I started to get slightly involved on the edge of church, and there was a group of young people who used to meet. A lovely young couple had a flat above a shop, and they filled it up with young people. They gathered us all off the wreck and off our motorbikes and wherever we came from. So they went for the worst of the guys around, and they opened up their flat. I remember sitting on the floor, and we sang a chorus. I've never sung a chorus before. We sang "Holy, Holy, Holy." And as we sang this, I knew that I didn't have God in my life. I knew that I didn't know Jesus, but I knew for the very first time that he was real. And I sensed if I closed my eyes, I was going to feel his presence.
And did you?
And I did.
And what happened?
I thought, if I close my eyes, I'm going to see God, feel God, experience God in a way that I've never done before. And I remember sitting on that floor, cross-legged, with all these blokes around and cups of coffee around, thinking, God is here.
Wow.
So God had always been in heaven, and I was happy that he was there. His hand was on the world. The world was beautiful. Suddenly I knew that God was in that room, and I knew that God needed to be in my heart, that I knew that there was another step that needed to be made. God was here on earth with me, with these people, but that he wanted to fill my life, change my life, and walk with me.
So how old you mentioned your teenage years?
So I'd have been about 15 at the time, I think, yeah.
Wow. So isn't it amazing? You mentioned all the school teachers and so forth. What an effect these people had on your life to sort of cultivate your soul, if you like. And they probably didn't even know, bless you. You probably didn't even know the effect they were having on you, and the effect that other people have had on me and other people watching this. But it's seismic sometimes, it really is. And it's the encouragement just to keep going. And sometimes on the mornings where you don't feel like it, to actually know that actually God's using what you're doing. You think it might be humble, but God is using it in profound ways. And there you are, 15, your heart has been shaped by that. You've been exposed to an awareness of God's love and presence before that, and now it's coming alive in a real sense.
Yes.
So what happened immediately after that at 15 then?
I got more stuck into the church, joined the youth group, and then my parents still didn't go, my brother didn't go, but I would be there on the Friday night. There was a Bible study. Saturday night there'd often be a social activity. Sunday I started to go to church, And I found myself going to 8 o'clock because often the day was busy, we were doing stuff. And there you are, 15-year-old boy, turning up at an 8 o'clock communion. It would have been the days of, morning, Book of Common Prayer. But there was something about it, and it was a lively church. There were groups of young people around. So Sunday night was then after the evening service, which I again started to go to. So that was quite out of the pattern of my normal life. There was a youth group, and that became very important.
So what did your family say then? Because you mentioned they weren't churchgoers at the time. What did they say when their son started to sort of go to church so regularly?
I remember when I became a Christian, thinking, I need to tell my parents about this. And I remember finding the worst possible moment when Mum was busy in the kitchen cooking. He couldn't have done it. And I remember thinking, right, I need to tell Mum that, that Jesus is alive, that he died for her, that he loves her, and she needs to give her heart to Jesus. And my dear Mum stopped what she was doing, put the rolling pin down, didn't hit me with it, and then looked at me and said, "Darling, I have known this for a very long time." And I realised that my parents had their own faith. They'd been confirmed, they'd been members of the church. My dad had been a prisoner of war for a long, long time.
Wow.
In Germany, in North Africa. His tank got blown up around him.
Wow.
And he told me a story, if you've got time for one quick story. There was Dad in the desert. He gets a telegram delivered saying his mother's died. He's in the middle of the tank battles that were raging across North Africa. And he said he went to the chaplain who had a communion service every day, just there in the desert, just him and the chaplain. None of the other men turned up. And he says, I knelt there in the desert and gave thanks for my mum and asked the chaplain to pray for my family, because I knew I couldn't say goodbye to my mum.
Yeah.
I couldn't go to the funeral. I was in the middle of a battlefield. We're going to be fighting that day. And when I'd come back from church and he'd say, how did church go? I said, there weren't many people there this morning. He'd say, remember, it's worth it for one.
Yeah.
On the day my mum died, there was a chaplain. He and I knelt in the sand. We took bread and wine and we remembered my mum. And he didn't know whether he'd ever come back to England again.
Is your father still with us?
He died only a few years ago.
I would have loved to have interviewed him.
He's got great stories. So I think I knew in that moment that my parents did have a real faith, and therefore they were happy for me to go to church and encouraged it. I suppose my sadness was that they didn't come and enjoy some of the things that I was finding joy in. And
what a profound faith your father had. There it is. He's in the middle of life and death, and he's had the news about life and death as well, re his own mother. And he just realises that faith is more than just about being nice. It's about resurrection hope. It's about light in the darkness. It's about faith that's got a reality and a teeth to it, that even in the darkest times, Jesus' light is present and can make a difference, makes the ultimate difference. I mean, what's the expression? When the rubber hits the road, your father's faith stood. I interviewed the Bishop of Plymouth, Nick McGinnell, and he talked about his 2 years working for Tear Fund and how he went out to Africa a few times, and he said out there people's faith was a matter of life and death.
Yes.
And yet they were seemingly so happy. And I'm still musing over that one. That's just quite profound, it really is. So there you are, you're in your late teens now, your faith is developing, your parents are revealing their faith as well, and they're embracing you into, and permissioning you, I guess, into all of that. Were there any times of challenge along the way in that sort of first sort of embryonic time of your faith coming alive?
I was asked to lead the school Christian Union, which was an odd thing to do, but I took them on board, enjoyed doing that. And I think then when I went to university was just such an explosion of ideas and people and things, and that's when my faith took a bit of a dive. So, and I got involved in sport and all sorts of other stuff. And so though it was ticking along, it had lost something of its power and some of its vitality. Yeah. And I'm grateful to a friend who again came to me, picked me up, and put me back on the path.
Could you tell us about that?
Chap I was at school with, and then a chap I was at university with, he was the year above me at school, and he used to run the Christian Union. And I remember he came to me and said, we've met as Christian Union, would like you to lead the Christian Union. And I said, well, that's a bit tricky because I've never been. So, and the only time people have seen me, it's probably in the bar or on the football field. So
Just where Jesus would have been.
I'm not sure I'm quite the right bloke. You know, my life, it doesn't have that touch of authenticity and holiness. And I said, look, you've got the wrong guy. You know, if I try and lead a Christian union, they're going to say, how can this guy offer himself as a leader?
Right.
And he said, that's why we want you to lead the Christian union. Because actually you'll get to know the Christians. There are about 50, 60 in the college. So it's quite a big Christian union. He said, you'll get to know them really quickly. He said, but what you know is all the other people in college. And so that helps us to connect our faith with all the other things that are going on. So I think my friend named Mike coming along, sensing I was on the, thanks Mike, that I was on the wrong path, going in the wrong direction, and just my faith was ebbing away, stepped in and said, no, come on, this is a moment where you need to decide which way you're going to go, and are you going to be with God and serve Him properly and fully, and share your faith and live out your faith and make that visible, or are you just going to slide away?
Were there any moments during that time of making that decision, that seismic decision in your life, which is the reason why you're sat here now as the Bishop of Bath and Wells, were there any supernatural moments, moments of intimacy with God?
Yeah, no, very much so. I mean, I was very shy about my faith and coy about my faith and uncertain about sharing it. But there was a charismatic church, St Matthew's, in Cambridge at the time. And as well as going to the chapel and the round church where I used to go, which was great for teaching and Bible study, I went off to the round church in the evening. And people there were discovering the gifts of the Spirit. It was the early 70s. And I remember going forward one Sunday evening and somebody laying hands on me and praying that I'll be filled with the Spirit, that I'd speak in tongues. And I remember cycling home from the church with no lights on my bike, with my hands in my pocket, just praising God in tongues and other languages. The gift of tongues came to me on my bicycle, cycling home on my own.
Through Cambridge?
Through that church. And I remember the following day seeing somebody coming across the sort of the quadrangle, and you know, Cambridge is quite quiet and posh and peaceful. And I remember throwing out my window, which was a sash window, and just shouting out, "John, praise the Lord." And I didn't know who was listening. I didn't care who was listening. I was so full of the joy and the presence and the love of God that I could not keep it in. Now, that was a transformation from somebody who was, I went to church, went to chapel. People would have known I was a Christian, but I wasn't speaking about my faith.
Right.
And suddenly,
Boom.
for me, there was just this joy in discovering Jesus and wanting to tell people about Jesus. So for that you asked about a supernatural moment.
Yeah.
That was one of them for me.
The joy. You mentioned the joy. What was that joy like? And was it a joy based on, of course, an intimate encounter with Jesus Christ? But in my mind's going, and I don't know why, but let's just run with this, to the early apostles when they started to experience the risen Jesus. And they went from, as we all know, quite a frightened, understandably, group of individuals to being almost fearless and running out onto the streets of Jerusalem to proclaim the risen Lord. And I often think they didn't do it just because God gave them an injection of courage. They did it, I think, because they were suddenly set free. Free from, because of this intimate encounter with Jesus Christ, the risen, technically like the risen Lord. And it was like they were free from lots of the human condition stuff, like worries about life, worries about death, worries about importance and identity. It was just all there. So it was a supernatural thing, of course it was, but there was a tapestry and a texture to it, like a release that just made them, I'm going out onto the streets, come death or life. This is just too good to hold back. So they had a joy, but it was a certain shape and flavour. Are you able to describe the joy?
Yeah, I mean, that's really helpful. I haven't ever linked what happened to me riding my bicycle through the dark of Cambridge on my own, singing in tongues, with Pentecost. That might seem very strange. I think I need to think about that. I think there's a real link, and some of what happened then was what I experienced as well. So college had a mission. The chapel went to a very tough Yorkshire mining village. And I signed up. I was the first one. And we went down a mine, we spoke to the miners, we went into the mining clubs, we went round the pubs, just to live and share our faith. There must have been a link between the chaplain and the vicar or the curate there. And so he took this bunch of students. And I think the person that went on that college mission was very different to the person that I would have been if it hadn't been for that joyful discovery of the risen Jesus.
I like to consider myself a bumbling evangelist. I'm not the best, but that's where my heart is, like a mission enabler evangelist. And I'm often asked, what's the first thing you should do in terms of a mission initiative, be it a local one, a diocesan-wide one, a city one, that sort of thing. And obviously what people want is the nitty-gritty. You plan this, you plan that, you plan this, you plan that. What I have seen in terms of individual personal evangelism and, if you like, corporate evangelism, is that it best works if actually, rather than sort of sitting down and having a planning meeting, you go on retreat first. And you basically spend some time alone with Jesus Christ and experience what you're talking about, which is intimacy with him. Because I have seen Christians who you might describe as alive and force them in their faith, but the moment they have the kind of experience you've talked about, it takes them to another level and they just can't stop, and the evangelism is something that's just bursting from them. And I think that's the point when your evangelism initiative needs to start.
Yep. Tonight I'm going to be licensing somebody to a new ministry as a vicar, and one of the things I will say to them is, it is not what you do, it's the person you are. And your ministry, if your ministry is going to flourish and if people are going to be blessed, then you're going to touch the lives of your church and your community and those who are way beyond the life of the church. It will only come about if you're walking with God, if God is walking with you, and people sense and know and experience the love and the joy of Christ in your heart. So if you let that go, then the job becomes a job.
Yeah.
If you fill your boots with Jesus, you've got something to give away.
Amen. What was it like to speak in tongues?
New experience for me. I mean, I'd heard people speaking in tongues earlier and I thought that was rather sort of strange, and certainly for other people, not for me. So it was just, it was like bubbling and burbling, and
Did you know what you were saying?
I had no idea what I was saying. I was filled with joy, filled with praise, and I just opened my mouth and just sang. And I can't remember whether people looked at me or saw me. It was a winter's night. There probably weren't many people around. But I was not aware of other people. I just wanted to praise God. And he gave me a language to do it in.
I've got this image of you riding through the sometimes cobbled streets of Cambridge. It's winter, it's night. You're doing this crazy death-defying ride of not holding on to...
hands in my pockets.
La, 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 la. Speaking out in tongues, which to me often sounds like an ancient form of Arabic, Aramaic, that sort of thing.
I think that's right.
And there you are, like, in this like state of rapture almost, this ecstasy almost, and you don't know what you're specifically saying, but your heart is singing. That's the word you use, singing to the Lord. That's just an amazing image.
And then the following day, I was at lectures learning about physics and biology and chemistry. So, and for me, you talked about the importance of science and faith, and you don't see them in conflict,
no.
And I don't either. There is a group of people I don't, unfortunately, get to their meetings very often, but there's something called the Society of Ordained Scientists,
oh, right.
And there are some really significant scientists who are absolutely very top of their field, who also hold a deep Christian faith and are themselves ordained. And their writings, their thinking, their prayers are really inspiring, and it's encouraging to know there are so many people today who are, whether it's in medicine or in chemistry or in physics or astrophysics, whatever their field is, they are at the very top of their game.
It's glorious.
And yet they also have a deep faith in God, who has created it all, given it to us, blessed us with it, and calls us to steward it, and that's important as well, the stewarding of creation.
So encouraging. So there you are. You've spoken in tongues, you've signed up to your mission, and what have you. Your faith is coming alive in that Acts 2 sort of fashion, if I may continue to use that description. What happens next?
Come the third year at uni, you have to start thinking that there's a door there and you're going to have to head for it, and there's going to be a world out there, and you're going to have to engage with it and find yourself a job. And I was thinking perhaps about social work, something which was about people for caring. I thought about the job I wanted was to run Gatwick Airport.
Oh, right. right.
I remember thinking, I don't know who you are. Must be somebody who runs Gatwick Airport, runs all the flights and the safety and the shops and the finances, and I'm coming for you. That's the job I want to have. And
Why?
No idea.
What was it about that?
No idea. I got the application form for the Civil Airports Authority and was thinking about filling it in. But at that same time, there were people around me who were beginning to see something different, a different path for me. So the college chaplain said, had I thought about ordination? The curate at home, when I went home for the holidays, said, look, have you thought about being ordained? This may be what God is calling. I think it is. Now, I had felt that in my heart, but I didn't want to take it forward, and I hadn't told people. And I remember one night, there was a group of lads, we were all sort of talking and drinking our way through the night. It was in the middle of exams, right at the end of college, and I said, look, guys, I'm off to bed. I need to get some sleep, do some studying. In the morning, they were all walking into breakfast. They'd been up all night, and they'd gone around our groups and said, this is what Phil's going to do, this is what Rob's going to do, this is what Tony's going to do. They've worked out what everyone was going to do when they left college.
Yeah.
And they said, do you know, we know what you're going to do. And I said, no. They said, you're going to be a vicar.
No!
And these were guys who never went to chapel, never went to church, would say that in all honesty, probably they didn't have a faith. And yet they said, we think this is what is where you're heading. So there were a number of people who said that to me.
It's incredible, isn't it? Because I used to be an ADO, an area director of ordinance, which is someone who helps people discern their calling, in particular when it comes to ordination. And often I felt it was like God had imprinted the calling upon their very soul, and it was just going to ooze out and blossom out, no matter what. You know, it's just going to be there for all to see. And as we know, one of the evidence points, as it were, for someone who's called to ordination is that other people start to see it, and unbidden starts to say, I wonder if you thought about it. So here you are. So how long before you went into the formal process?
So that would have been about Christmas of my last year. I remember going home and over Christmas talking to schoolmates, talking to Anne, who was a great friend of mine, and I remember saying to her, I think God might be calling me to be ordained. And she said, my mum has been saying that for years. And there were the confirmations that people had never said anything to me. And people, weren't surprised, and they said, kind of, well, why you look surprised? Why are you uncertain? You know, we've seen this for a long time. But actually nobody had said these things to me. So, and then what happens is you go off to a conference. I was selected. I was still quite young, so I took a year out, worked with deprived young people, Scottish, many of whom were either homeless or had come from broken homes. And that was great to learn a bit about the world properly. And then I went off to college to study.
And did you have, what were your family thinking and saying at the time? And did you have a girlfriend? Did you have a wife at the time? And if so, what did she say?
I had a girlfriend. I didn't have a wife at that stage. But I remember going back to my mum and saying to my parents, who had helped and paid me through college and had supported me through it and had seen me heading towards what they thought was a degree and then a life in science of some form. And I remember saying, look, I need to say, I think I know where I want to do when I leave university, and it's the worst thing you can imagine.
And what did they say?
And so when I told them, Mum said, yeah, we've known that for a long time.
Wow.
Did not come as a surprise. And I really thought they would be rocking and reeling and surprised, and I thought they would try and persuade me not to, or maybe think, well, is this wise, or have you thought about it, or do you know what this might mean? And they went, yeah. And so Mum, Dad, still not going to church. I tell them the news and they go, yeah.
And how did you feel?
I think I then felt, okay, this now needs to be tested. It's one thing for your vicar and your chaplain to say, have you thought about being ordained? Because kind of if they're in the church, they might say that sort of thing. But when people outside the church, at college, school friends, not involved in the church, when my parents, and when I started to tell people, they all went, yeah.
Wow. And
I don't think I led the sort of life that was necessarily, in my view, wouldn't lead people to think that's where I was heading. So, let the reader understand. I had a picture of what a vicar was and what a holy monk was, and I kind of thought, I'm not a vicar in that sort of mould. So maybe the church is going to say no anyway, and that might be a good thing, because they might say, yeah, you've got a faith, and we can see that, but actually we don't think ordination is for you. They actually said, yes, we think it is for you. So that that then swung in that direction.
I'm fast running out of time. I could speak to you all day. I think we're going to have to fast forward to the calling to be a bishop. How did that come about, and how did you feel?
In the church today, you basically apply for jobs. So I'm very pleased to say that jobs are almost advertised. The idea of the bishop reaching out and taking somebody and dropping them in a parish here, or taking somebody and moving them on, like a sort of chessboard, those days have long gone. So almost every job in this diocese is publicly advertised. People apply, and then we have interviews, and they are discerned in the way that anyone listening would recognise it as a normal practice. For a bishop, it's slightly different. You are invited to apply. So somebody says, look, have you got some papers? Can you tell us a bit about yourself? Are you happy for us to put your papers in? But they probably don't necessarily tell you who might want to look at those. But what it means is that there is another bishop and perhaps a search committee who have asked if they could find out a bit more about somebody, in this case me. You put your papers in. You may be longlisted. 20 people, you might be shortlisted to 8 people. They might call 4 people for an interview. And so that's the process by which I found myself being interviewed to be a bishop in Winchester Diocese. I became the Bishop of Basingstoke.
And how did you feel when you actually got the thumbs up?
I mean, just extraordinary. I was delighted, thrilled, anxious, daunted, but I also sensed a calling to that.
All right, cool.
I knew the Bishop of Winchester a little bit, somebody I hugely admired, and I thought to work with this person, to work alongside this person, to work for this person, and to work in this diocese will just be an extraordinary privilege.
This is quite a big question, so because it spans quite a bit of time. So you've been in ministry, I'd imagine, for a few years now.
39 and counting.
Right.
Still going. And loving it. Ordained ministry. I think I'd want to say we're in ministry wherever we are, whatever we're doing.
I agree.
That's the years of ordained ministry.
Couldn't agree more. What I want to ask is something along the lines of when you look in an overarching sort of way at all of those years, significant moments, or is there one significant moment that you'd like to sort of just talk about now as being like a real God moment, like in your time of being a parish priest, your time of being a bishop, something that you think, wow, that could never have come about through our own efforts, that's got God written all over it, something of that ilk?
Loads of things, trying to think of just one really. I remember one day I was on my bicycle, I was in my first parish as a curate, I was in my car. It's another occasion. I was in my car and I was coming back home. Jane was a teacher, my wife. I tried to get home if I could so we could have a cup of tea. There was usually stuff in the evening. So we'd try and meet up at sort of the end of the school working day. And I was coming home and I just felt God was saying, I want you to go and visit Maureen's mum. Now, Maureen lived up opposite us, and her mum and dad used to come in this fabulous old car on a Sunday, have a cup of tea, and they'd go home. And after a while, I noticed the car didn't come. So I saw Maureen, and it was months afterwards, and I said, I haven't seen your mum and dad recently. And she said, oh, well, mum comes up on the bus, dad's died. Yeah. So I said, well, let me know where mum lives, and I'll pop in and see her sometime. And so I was driving home, and I truly believe I heard God say, go and visit Maureen's mum. I didn't know what her name was, and I thought, oh, this is madness. I opened up my diary and scribbled away in the back somewhere, I had her address. I didn't know where it was. This was the city of Portsmouth. It was right the other side of Milton. In those days, you get out a map, and I found the road, and I drove across there, and I knocked on the door. Couldn't remember Maureen's dad's name. I thought, I wonder what she's going to think. I knocked on the door, and she said, oh, thank goodness you've come. It was the day the Pope came to England. She was watching the Pope on television. I had no idea it was the anniversary of her husband's death. He had died a year before that day. If you'd asked me, I might have said 3 months or 6 months or 9 months. I had no idea when he died. And she said, I was praying that someone would come and see me.
Wow.
She didn't go to our church. Maureen didn't go to our church. What was I doing knocking on this lady's door on the anniversary of her husband's death?
Golly.
Now that's a God moment, isn't it?
Yeah, not half.
and I couldn't tell you where the house was. I couldn't, if you narrowed it down to 10 houses, I wouldn't know which house it was. I can't remember anything about the garden, the address. Never went there again.
Wow.
But that's the Spirit saying, you're loafing about, you're in the car, I come from a meeting, I was driving up the M27, I was going for a cup of tea, and God says, you don't need a cup of tea. There's a lady who wants to give you a cup of tea.
Yeah.
And off you go.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you for that. And it brings me to a powerful question in the remaining time we've got. The power of story. When you recounted that story, my heart was stirred. So in some sense, maybe that's a first step towards answering this question. Your entire diocese, as you said at the beginning of the interview, in terms of vision, is about telling our story. Why?
What we seek God is calling us to do, and it's our response to the love of God, the overpowering, overwhelming grace and love of God, is that He's calling us to live and to tell our story. As a diocese, we've said we want to put mission and evangelism at the heart of all that we do. Mm-hmm. The word mission, the word evangelism, they fall sometimes hard on the ears. People don't quite understand what that means. And so living the story is living the mission of God. Telling the story is evangelism. It's telling the good news of Jesus. Mm. So mission and evangelism, at the heart of all we do, we speak about living and telling the story. And sometimes it's easier to live it. Sometimes it's very hard for people to live out their faith in their own family life, in their own workplace, wherever they are, with their own life's experiences. Sometimes it's hard to tell the story. But I think what we say is we need to be doing both. And we need to help and ask God to help us to grow in our confidence and our joy, so that it becomes the natural thing we do, not something that is an extra thing to our life, but it's right through the day.
I'm struck by what you said, and in terms of the power of story, with reference to the story of the woman at the well in the Bible, when Jesus encountered her. And she'd had an interest in life, and there Jesus turns up and he's able to somehow read her entire life and tell her what she's done and all the rest of it. And they have this dialogue, and suddenly she's awakened to who he is. Slowly but surely, she's awakened to who he is. Now, what does she do? She's not an apologist. She's not a doctrine teacher, all of which I think are vital and wonderful and should be upheld, and we should do more of that. However, she's not that. But what does she do? She goes straight back into her village and she tells the story of her encounter with Jesus Christ. That's all she does, tells the story. But there's something about, I'm getting tingly just saying it, there's something about the power of doing that then eventually led to the conversion of her entire village. And I just think amazing. So
she says, I've met a man who has told me everything about my life. He understands me. Come and meet him.
So there's something...
Imagine that woman leading the village up the hill, down the hill, wherever it was, to the well, and he's still there. Yeah. And maybe he's gone, but the man who looked into her heart and her life and her eyes, loved her, cared for her, spoke God's truth to her, still sitting there.
I just find it astonishing that...
Wouldn't it be lovely to hear the rest of the story?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, he stayed in the village for a couple of days, I think Jesus did, and that sort of thing, but it would have been lovely to have heard, what he did in the village and what they did and the conversations and so forth. I totally agree with you. But nonetheless, the power of story as one of the primary tools of evangelism, I just think should warm the hearts of us all, really, because we often think that evangelism's got to be hard. It's not real evangelism unless it's really hard, something completely opposite to who you are, and other such stuff. But sometimes it can boil down to actually finding your passion and then turning that passion somehow into evangelism. And one of them is just telling our story. And I often find people think, my story's just not that impressive. Nonsense. Everyone's story is priceless. It really is. And I think we have a command by God, given to the Hebrew people, that now comes through to us, to recount what God has done for us in our lives. And I don't know if you've noticed, but in the Church Times, which is a sort of a newspaper in England that comes out every month? Every week. But you're starting to see jobs in there now, full-time jobs, to be storytellers, which I find amazing. So there's clearly a move of the Spirit in relation to telling the story, I think, anyway.
And you asked me, what's the best thing about being a bishop? And I said, meeting people. And the stories that people tell me are extraordinary. And we confirm people in their 80s and 90s and 100s. And we meet church wardens who've been church wardens for 60 years. And they have faithfully been caring for that church and the people and their communities. And those stories are fabulous. And that's why what you're doing is great. You're helping ordinary people like us just tell our story. We don't know who's listening, but we hope that there's something about our story that helps people think about their story and tell their story.
With that in mind, 2 more questions before we go to my quickfire. I've often heard people talk about the seasons of their relationship with God, and sometimes it can feel, for sometimes inexplicable reasons, that God is sometimes, well, they feel in their heart that he's more of a judgmental sort of policeman in the sky than a loving father. And then other times he's just the most, well, at least that's how they feel, the most forgiving and loving father ever, just full of grace. And of course, through Jesus, we know, what God is really like. But, you have seasons of how it feels. We've referenced your relationship with God. If you don't mind me asking, so it's quite a personal question, because I'm asking you to sort of talk about your soul as it is right now. How does your relationship with God feel right now?
At the moment, I'm very excited. We're just starting a new academic term. I still sort of think in terms. So I don't know when people are going to listen to this, but for us, it's August. So we're looking forward to that fantastic season where everything is starting up again. Churches are getting going again after the summer. The holiday clubs, the youth groups have happened. The soul survivors have happened. All things have happened. New wines happen. Whatever it is that people have done, and then we're off, and we've got Christmas coming, which of course is not just that great family celebration, but it's the time when we think about God coming to us. So I'm excited. The next few weeks are going to be busy and wonderful.
Absolutely, I'm sure they are. So your relationship with God at the moment feels exciting.
Indeed, yeah.
What's the good news?
What's the good news? The good news is simply this, that God cares and loves for us and wants the best for us. And the way that we discover the best for us, for ourselves, is to open our lives to his love and let him lead us, guide us, transform us, strengthen us, comfort us, walk with us, teach us, all those things that God longs to do and does.
Wonderful. Quick fire round, if I may, just to finish off, and then you'd be willing to pray for us, that'd be great. But before I do that, is there anything about your story that we haven't covered today in the limited time that we've got that you would like to just mention now? You don't have to, but I just wanted to give you the opportunity, just in case there's something about who you are as a person before God.
I think it's important to say that there have been times when I've doubted, there's times when I've wondered, there's times when I've not been sure, but I know that there are people who will be listening, I don't know who they are, they may well get in touch with you, for whom life is desperately hard, for whom faith is about hanging on just about, or people who have lost faith, who had a faith in God, trusted him, but something's happened in their life that's broken that love and that trust. And I wouldn't want people listening and watching to our conversation. You and I have got very excited, we've talked about some of the good things, but remembering that for many people, life is dark and lonely and difficult. And actually, that's where God longs to be. And if you and I in our conversation have made it seem that faith is easy, we've made a mistake. It's a gift to us. God blesses us. He longs to bless everyone. But for many people, their journey is tough.
I'm going to say this really badly, inarticulately, but with reference to what you're saying, God's obviously everywhere. But I think there's a special sense of his presence on the edges of society, where the poor are, where the destitute are, where the lonely are, where the heartbroken are. It might not feel like it because I've been there many times, but I can now sort of say, even though I'm someone who still obviously experiences life and the ups and downs of it, that actually the most profound moments of intimacy that I've ever had with God have been in those times actually of just utter dark night of the soul. So if you are, as Bishop Peter said, going through something at the moment, our prayers are with you, and may we reassure you that God is there, even though it might feel not like it. Feels a bit incongruous to now go into the spotlight thing, which is just a bit of fun. And it's, as I often say in these interviews, they are in one sense light-hearted, but a psychologist would have a field day. There's only a few of them. And then we can pray out. Okay. What's your secret pleasure?
It would probably be sitting on the beach.
Oh, yeah.
With the sun out,
Nice.
Just watching the tide come in and the tide go out.
If you could have a superpower, what would it be?
If I had a superpower, it would be stopping climate change.
Oh, right. That's a good one. I never thought of that. Normally flying or being invisible or something like that, but stopping climate change. Can I just pause? We're actually obviously in a palace, right? And there's a lot of life going on outside there. So if you're hearing lots of noise and buzzes and stuff, that's just like, life. We're not in a studio. If you weren't a bishop, what's the job you'd most like to have? If you can click your fingers, you mentioned that you'd like to be like looking after Gatwick Airport, which I've never heard anyone say. It's amazing. But if you were not a bishop and you can click your fingers, what's the job you'd most like to have?
I think I'd be working with young people.
Oh,
I think young people, students, we're privileged. We've got 4 children of our own.
Right, wow.
We live in a very quiet palace. This has been built in the 13th century. They live in a very buzzy, noisy, exciting, busy life in London. And I think it's a huge privilege to live where we do and to experience the countryside that you drove through today.
Yes.
But I think if I wasn't doing this, I'd want to be working with young people in some way and engaging with lives that are really full, rich and busy, and trying to help them find meaning, purpose and direction for their lives.
Wonderful answer, thank you. Favourite cereal?
We're talking breakfast cereal?
Yep.
Well, I've just come back from a camp where I've brought back boxes the size of elephants of cornflakes. So for the next 6 months, every morning it's a plate of cornflakes for me.
Whether you like it or not.
And I should be so pleased to go back to muesli.
Dark chocolate or milk chocolate?
Dark chocolate for me.
Can you reverse park?
If I'm going into a right hand, easy. If I'm going into a left hand one, not so easy.
I had a mate who was like that. It was almost intuitive on the right side of the left hand.
I can do one within an inch, the other I can't do it within a mile.
That's interesting, it really is. You're in heaven for the first time and you meet Jesus face to face. What's the first thing that you'd like to ask him?
I don't think I need to ask him any questions. I think I need to stand there and say, Lord, I'm sorry. And Lord, thank you. And Lord, I'm sorry I didn't know and see what you were doing.
Therefore, you're in heaven for the first time and you meet Jesus face to face. What's the first thing that you'd like him to say to you?
The thing that the Bible says he's going to say, which is an amazing promise, and there's lots in the Bible about the gift of life, and it is in the parable that Jesus told. He says, well done, my good and faithful servant.
Oh, can you imagine that?
When we get there, we'll say, Lord, we've neither been good nor faithful, but he will say, welcome.
That was brilliant. You're in heaven for the first time. Who's the first family member you'd like to meet?
I think I'd like to meet my dad again.
Yeah, I'd like you to meet your dad.
Love my mum. I'd like to meet both of them, but there's so many questions I never asked Dad, and I just wished I'd drawn on his wisdom and his experience. He didn't want to talk about the war years, I understand that, but I wished I'd asked. There's 1,000, 2,000 questions, 20,000 questions I want to ask him. So I hope eternity is a big stretch, because I've got loads to ask him.
I'm sure it is. Last question. You're in heaven for the first time, and you can have a dinner party like this, and there's about 5 or 6 people you can invite around the table. Biblical characters, or perhaps people of history. Who would you invite?
I'd like Tutu to be there,
and
possibly Mandela. I think they've had a big influence on the world, not just on their own people on their own continent. It'd be great to hear their stories, different, but there's lots the same. From history, I'd like to talk, I think, to Newton.
Really?
I think
that'd be interesting.
I think he saw so much, and it'd be interesting to know he changed the world, and whether he knew what he was doing. And I think he had a lot more that he wanted to discover and reveal, but the world wasn't ready. So it would be good to know what Newton could see when he gave us Newtonian physics. I think there was a lot more behind his writings and his thinking.
Anyone else?
Who else would I like to see from history? I think Thomas I think Cook the explorer,
Oh, right, yeah.
and Darwin, of course, to go off on a ship for 3 years.
Oh, wow, yeah.
And not know where you're going, not know what you're going to find. Those great explorers. Shackleton, he was an extraordinary leader of men. Some of those folk who journeyed and discovered. And why did you go? What drove you? Why would you leave home for 3 years? Why would you go through all of that?
Yeah.
Why did you keep going through all the ice, through all the winters of Antarctica? Astonishing.
You've been an absolutely wonderful interviewee. Thank you so much for your time. We could have talked for ages, I'm sure, and there's probably a million and one things that we've missed in terms of your God story. But I think we've captured the heart of it and the heart of you, and I like to think people watching this will be deeply blessed by it, I really do. Would you mind praying us out and thinking about the viewers in particular, who, even though this is still a very embryonic YouTube channel, could be all over the world in some sense. So if you could think, global, why not?
Absolutely.
And
I hope people are listening. You'll either just listen, or if you're able to, join in with our prayer.
Yeah.
We're going to be praying. We're praying with you. We're praying for you. We're going to pray. Father God, we thank you that you watch over us, and we thank you that you walk with us. We pray that you'll lead us and you'll guide us. We pray that you'll fill us each and every day with the joy and the peace and the love that comes from your Holy Spirit. Help us to follow Jesus, to become more like Jesus, to speak and to live like Jesus. May you so bless us that we may bless others, and through that, may this world be a more peaceful, a more prosperous, a happier, a fairer, a more just world. And we pray, Lord God, that your hand, your love, your blessing, your light will be with those in need this day and forevermore. Amen.
Amen.